For decades, every gas station in America had them. You pulled up to the pump, and you waited. You didn't get out of the car. Someone came to you. If you drove in the 1960s or 70s, you probably remember exactly how it worked. The smell of gasoline in the air, a bucket of soapy water sitting beside the pump, a long squeegee leaning against the curb, and a young man walking toward your car with a rag sticking out of his back pocket. Then your tires rolled over that rubber hose stretched across the driveway. A second later, a bell rang inside the station. That was the signal. Someone had pulled in. And within seconds, a young man in a uniform stepped outside and started walking toward your car. Most stations had their names stitched across the pocket of the shirt. Texaco, Shell, Gulf, Sinclair, Union 76. He leaned down to your window and asked the same question drivers heard thousands of times every single day. How much today? Sometimes the answer was simple. Fill it up. Other times it was just a few dollars. $5 worth. Back then, $5 could take you a long way. While the pump started ticking away beside the car, the attendant didn't just stand there waiting. He lifted the hood, pulled the dipstick, checked your oil, and if it was low, he already knew exactly which can to grab. Most stations kept metal oil cans stacked on a rack near the pumps, the kind with the pointed spout you pushed through the lid. He poured slowly, wiped the dipstick clean with a rag, then slid it back into the engine. After that, he grabbed the squeegee. There was always a bucket of soapy water nearby. He scrubbed the windshield in long strokes, sometimes the back window, too. Then he crouched down beside the tires, pressed his thumb into the rubber, or grabbed the air hose hanging from a reel nearby. If something looked low, he filled it. All of this happened while the pump quietly counted gallons beside the car. And if you were a regular customer, the attendant often knew your vehicle. He might remember that your Ford burned a little oil, or that the right rear tire on your Chevy always ran a little low. Gas stations back then were smaller places. Most were locally owned. Often the owner worked there himself. Behind the pumps there was usually a small garage, 2 service bays, a hydraulic lift, and a mechanic leaning over the engine of someone's Oldsmobile or Dodge. They were called service stations for a reason. They didn't just sell gasoline. They fixed cars. Inside the station there might be a rack of free road maps, a soda machine humming quietly against the wall, sometimes even a cigarette vending machine. Many drivers remember those machines clearly. You dropped in a couple of coins, pulled the handle, and a pack slid out with 2 pennies taped to the top for change. It was a different time. For a lot of young men growing up in the 1960s and 70s, working at a gas station was their first real job. After school, on weekends, or long summer days standing outside pumping gas in the heat. Maybe you even did it yourself. They learned how to talk to customers, how to handle money, and how to recognize a problem with a car before the driver even noticed it. Inside the small office, things were just as simple. There was usually a counter with a heavy metal cash register. Behind it sat a rack of paper receipts and a stack of folded road maps. If you paid with a credit card back then, the attendant didn't swipe anything. He took your card inside and placed it into a small metal machine. Then he slid the handle across. Chunk, chunk. The machine pressed the numbers into a carbon slip. That sound alone probably brings back memories for a lot of drivers. You signed the paper. He handed you the top copy, and the transaction was done. No screens, no PIN numbers, no waiting for approval from a computer, just paper, carbon copies, and a signature. Gas stations also competed for customers in ways that seem unusual today. Many stations gave away things for free. You might get a road map when you filled the tank. Some stations handed out drinking glasses with their logo on them. Others offered S&H green stamps, which families collected and traded for household items. Sometimes there were promotional keychains or toys sitting on the counter. And every now and then, an attendant might hand a kid a free piece of candy while their parents paid for the gas. Little things like that made those places feel less like a business and more like part of the neighborhood. But if you were driving in the early 1970s, you probably remember the moment things started changing. It didn't happen all at once. It started with a crisis. In 1973, the oil crisis hit. Gas prices surged almost overnight after OPEC imposed an oil embargo during the Yom Kippur War. Stations that had been selling gasoline for 30 or 40 cents a gallon suddenly faced much higher supply costs. Profit margins collapsed. At the same time, labor costs were rising. Gas stations that once employed 2 or 3 attendants per shift suddenly couldn't afford them anymore. The math simply stopped working. Self-service pumping had existed before this, but many states had banned it. Officials claimed it was dangerous for customers to pump their own gas. But those rules also protected jobs. When the crisis hit, those bans slowly began disappearing. Self-service pumps started appearing beside the full service lanes, and there was one obvious difference: the price. Self-service gasoline was cheaper, sometimes 5 cents less per gallon, sometimes 10. For families filling up several times a week, that added up quickly. Drivers began switching. Even people who had never pumped their own gas before figured it out after a few tries. The nozzle had a trigger. The pump had instructions, and automatic shutoffs prevented the tank from overflowing. Once drivers got used to it, paying extra for someone else to pump the gas started to feel unnecessary. Stations responded by reducing staff. Attendants slowly disappeared from the pumps. Some moved inside to run the register. Others lost the job entirely. By the early 1980s, many stations had converted almost completely to self-service. Some still kept one full-service lane for older customers, but even those eventually disappeared. By the 1990s, it was rare to find a gas station where someone else pumped your fuel. Today, New Jersey is the only state where attendants are still legally required to do it. Everywhere else, drivers handle it themselves. But what disappeared wasn't just a job. It was a small part of everyday life. The bell ringing when a car rolled in, the smell of gasoline in the air, the uniform, the squeegee sliding across the windshield, and the quick conversation through the driver's window. Gas stations used to be places where people talked for a minute, where someone noticed if your tire looked low, where someone might warn you if your engine sounded rough. Today, the pumps are faster, the cars are more reliable, and the process is more efficient. But something small disappeared along the way: the bell, the service, and the young man leaning down beside the car asking the same simple question millions of drivers heard for decades. Fill it up? If you remember gas stations like this, tell me something. Did you ever work at a gas station? And if you did, what station was it? Texaco? Shell? Phillips 66? And if you were driving back then, what was the first car you ever pulled up to the pump with, year and model?